All right, I think I will get us going. So thank you everyone for joining and for expressing interest in this session. Quick introduction myself, I'm Sebastian DeGrande. I'm the CEO here at PCX. I'll talk more about us and our other speakers here in a moment. But all of you have signed up because of the topic at hand. As you know, there's been a wave of new EU legislation, including both the Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulation, PPWR, and the Corporate Social Responsibility Directive, CSRD. And these are really reshaping the way companies have to design, reduce, and report on their plastic packaging in Europe. So today, we're really excited to welcome two leading sustainability experts from both Peterson Solutions and the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, who are going to join us in a conversation on what's changing, how to comply, what it means for your plastic responsibility plans. We will be recording the session as well for those who are unable to attend, and we'll make sure that's going to be available to everyone. So first, a quick intro on us, PCX Markets, who are hosting the event. PCX Markets is a plastic responsibility platform. We provide upstream and downstream solutions to help companies achieve their sustainability goals. PCX Markets also manages a transparent marketplace that activates an ecosystem of partners who collect, transport, and responsibly process plastic waste. And we support the communities that do the work, improving livelihoods along the way. We also have offerings for recycled materials through our PCX Circular Plastics offering, amongst other things. Our mission ultimately is to accelerate the transition to a circular economy and really build a future where no plastic waste ends up in nature. We're a little bit along the way. As you see here, we've verifiably enabled the cleanup of over 135 million kilos of plastic pollution worldwide, which we're very proud of, but is still very much, as we all know, a drop in the bucket. We're also proud to be a certified B Corp, and we work closely with our sister organization, PCX Solutions, which is a nonprofit that advises companies and governments on plastic responsibility and also oversees the plastic pollution reduction standard. So again, very happy to be hosting the session and appreciate everybody's time here. Let me introduce our two speakers and the agenda here. Well, first of all, as you'll see on the agenda, we're going to have some opening remarks and presentations for a short window. They're sort of speed rounds of introductions by our two speakers on the topics at hand. And then we'll do some round robin discussion in the fireside chat. And then we welcome all of you posting questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to open up for Q&A and fielding some of those questions as well along the way. So let me introduce our speakers here. First, we have Martin Tickner. Very happy to have Martin joining us. He's Chief Advisor, Circular Solutions at the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. Martin has more than 40 years in the chemical and plastics industry in general management, manufacturing, business, commercial, technical, and innovation functions, including 10 years in strategy and M&A. In 2020, as he wrapped up his industry career, similar to myself, he joined the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, and it was really motivated by the challenge of addressing plastic waste and the opportunity to transition to a circular economy in plastics. So thank you, Martin, for joining. Martin will speak here in a moment. The other speaker we have and are proud to have joining us is Elena Mancilla Carpintero. She's ESG EUDR Center of Excellence leader for Peterson Solutions. In her role, Elena's an expert on sustainability strategies and reporting. She helps companies implement sustainability strategies. She has an impressive background in agricultural engineering, the food industry, occupational health and safety, and she holds a European expert certificate in corporate social responsibility. Aside from her work with Peterson Solutions, she's also a lecturer in business sustainability at the EDEM School of Entrepreneurship in Valencia, Spain. So thank you again, Elena, for joining us. So with that, I want to invite Martin to kick us off. He's going to share a few slides specifically on the PPWR, which came into force in February of 2025, so very recently. Obviously, it aims to reduce packaging waste and promote reuse and recycling, as well as harmonize packaging rules across the EU And then Elena's going to speak specifically to the CSRD, which is now requiring more detailed, standardized, and audited disclosures on environmental, social, and governance issues. So again, after that, we'll have a bit of a fireside chat and then some Q&A, and we'll go from there. So with that, let me get out of the way and invite Martin to speak a bit.
Very good. So thank you, Sebastian, and good morning to the US part of the audience. Good afternoon to a few like me. Late afternoon in Holland, and a very late evening to those in the Philippines, I think. And many thanks for the opportunity to talk to you all today. My introduction has already been given, but to explain that as Chief Advisor of the Circular Solutions, it's kind of strategy and center of excellence job, looking at what it takes to enable circular systems. So that means that we're working on identifying and bringing out solutions that have to be technically viable, environmentally beneficial, politically and socially acceptable, and perhaps most difficult of all, economically viable. And for the latter, it's policies such as the PPWR that we're going to deep dive into in a few minutes that bring about changes in market dynamics, and I would even say potentially full paradigm shifts, forcing us to think about things in a very different way. So these regulations that we talk about, incredibly important. I would say even exciting topics. It's possible to get excited about regulations, and I will try and make it so. Let me just give one disclaimer up front. I'm not a regulatory expert, and I'm sure there are people on the call here who have more in-depth knowledge or more up-to-date knowledge than I have. So do feel free. I won't be offended if anybody drops a correction into the chat as we go. So Beth, if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Just a very short introduction to the Alliance. I'm a little bit obligated to do a sales pitch, but I'll keep it very short. We've been around for about 5 years, so still a relatively new organization, but coming to some maturity now. The Alliance is a not-for-profit venture funded by the private sector and with representation all along the value chain. So upstream participants from brands, converters, retailers, petrochemical companies, to the downstream sectors of waste management and recyclers. Today, about 60 members. We're not a trade association, that's really important. We're not into advocacy. In fact, our legal status doesn't allow us to do advocacy. So we don't represent our member company views, but we obviously listen to them. And we're tasked with and deeply funded to be able to do projects which demonstrate solutions and support subsequent adoption and replication. In the picture there, I'm not sure why these particular gentlemen feature in our corporate introduction pack, but you see John Muller, CEO of Procter & Gamble, Jim Fittling, CEO of Dow, both of whom served as chairman for the Alliance, and the current incumbent is a lady, Tracy Campbell from LyondellBasell. So we go to the next slide, and I promise to keep this part short. So the strategy of the Alliance is captured in this chart. The objective is to demonstrate solutions. So we recognize that our work alone can only, no matter how much money you have and how much you work on it, the ability to be able to achieve really large-scale, meaningful impact is not through our direct actions, but it's more what we're able to catalyze. So in particular, we work on demonstrating solutions and then looking at the enabling conditions which are going to enable systems change, replication of that solution on a large scale. And we do that by leveraging member company dollars to do smaller projects. It's giving us invaluable experience, insights into what it takes to make things work. We've done those all over the world, so 56 different countries, if I remember well. And today we're endeavoring to take that experience to a larger scale, unlocking capital dollars from private investors, developing financing, banks, or working with financing banks, development financing. And as we build increasingly larger programs, then that should pave the way to helping governments and private sector bring about true system change and new paradigms, as I talked about on the first page. Much of the work is in the non-OECD countries, looking at how to enable implementation of very basic waste management. But we also have programs in the global north. For example, a program addressing regulatory compliance with the European PPWR and the California SB 54, which is why I'm here today, why I'm familiar with those legislations. And then finally to note, I've already said we don't represent our member companies, but we do listen to them, their priority issues and their ideas on how to address those issues. So new members always welcome. Next slide, Beth, sales pitch over. And now we'll start to dive into PPWR. So if you're wondering what this picture is, it's actually showing the deployment of digital watermarks. This is one of the Alliance's projects that was run by the European Brand Association, funded by the Alliance. And we looked here at deployment of digital watermarks to support extremely accurate granular sorting of plastics, demonstrating detection, looking up in the global GS1 database and being able to see an article's attributes relevant to recycling at an industrial speed, 3.5 meters per second. So it's just illustrative of the type of work we do. Next slide, Beth. You've had the easy bit, now you have the more complex bit. So a lot of detail on this slide. I could talk to PPWR for half a day and still not cover all of the elements. I hope that you'll endeavor to read it while we're talking. I hope it's big enough on your screen that you can read it, and I'll just pick out a few highlights. So firstly, to note that within Europe, 40% of plastic and 50% of paper and board is used for packaging. And that represents a huge opportunity for improved carbon impact. This is reflected in the PWR. So improved carbon impact through reduction, through reuse, and through recycle. And I think that's important to recognize that the focus here is on an opportunity to improve carbon impact. That focus brought about the Plastics and Packaging Waste Directive, PPWD, which was first introduced in 1994. And that's just an illustration of good legislation takes a long time to cook. So 1994. And I emphasize here packaging waste. So the directive, which has now become regulations, addresses not only plastic, but paper and board, glass, and metal packaging. So it's all forms of packaging. That's actually a very important differentiation versus the California's SB 54, which is primarily a plastic agenda. The problem with the directive is that each member state had discretion over how to meet its goals. That led to inconsistencies, wasn't a level playing field, difficult for international operators, and hence the Commission decided in 2020 to replace that with a regulation. Comes into force, Sebastian's already mentioned this, February 2025, will start to apply from August 2026, so just around the corner. Important to note also is that additional clarity will be brought through a series of secondary legislation. So one of the challenges here is that key questions that businesses need answering are not necessarily answered yet. For example, the position of chemical recycling, we'll come to that. And I'm not going to go through each line item here. As I said, I hope that you're reading the chart while I'm talking. But in the lower half of the chart, you see the obligations which are placed on the member states, on the governments of the member states, which include mandatory collection, include recycling targets, and I would note also differentiated recycling targets, which are differentiated by type of packaging. Also, the compliance frameworks, which vary from fines for non-compliance all the way to withdrawal of the license to operate. I think for the audience today, the top half of the chart is more of interest, and you see here the phased introduction of various targets. Just cover them very, very quickly because I only have another couple of minutes here. EPR first is an important enabler. So EPR to support responsible design, fund the necessary systems, and within Europe, looking at mandatory eco-modulated financial contributions. That's important when we talk about design guidelines and how you facilitate the adoption of design guidelines. And then it starts in 2026 with limits on hazardous chemicals such as PFASs used in barrier coatings, heavy metals used in inks, etc. And then you'll find various threads through the whole thing: reduction in packaging use, additional bans on single use, such as lightweight plastic bags, hotel toiletries, packaging of fresh produce, harmonized labeling requirements, reuse and refill in takeaway sectors, reuse in transportation. So requirement for reusable packaging systems within a country or within a company transboundary. That's really rather important. redesign to ensure reusability, recyclability, compostability, and then some pretty aggressive recycling targets, which I'll come on to on the next page, Beth. Next page, yeah, thank you. Yeah. So here I pick out in the middle column a few of the key elements of the PPWR. So just bear with me and go down the verticals first. So for PPWR, I would just ask you to note firstly the recyclability target, 70% recyclable by 2030. There is a definition of recyclable, so it's got two dimensions to it. Firstly, how much of a package can actually be recycled if it's a multi-material package, like a spray pump, for example. There are different components in it, and those different components will have different levels of recyclability. 70% in 2030 rises to 80% in 2035. But it also measures compliance with design guidelines. And there is a scoring system which will be introduced, which if you're not compliant with design guidelines will reduce your ability to claim something as recyclable. Those design guidelines not yet published, so that's already, you can see, an important element of clarification. Secondly is the recycling targets, 55% by 2030. The recycled content targets, this is really important, 35% PCR content in each individual article. So every article of packaging has to have 35% PCR by 2030. With the exemption of non-PET. So PET bottles will be 35% as well, but non-PET food-approved applications, only 10%. That rises for the 35% to 65% in 2040. So pretty aggressive targets. And highlights, if you go to the right-hand column, a few key differences to SB 54. So firstly, SB 54 addresses plastic packaging. It is a largely plastic-oriented regulation. And by the way, sorry, I'm not sure I said it, but SB 54 is the Californian legislation. It's probably one of the architects in the US with a lot of reference to European legislation. Clearly, you can see that they've taken guidance from there, but adapted it for local use. It addresses plastic packaging. So switching to paper and board or glass or metal actually gets you off the hook of SB 54, regardless of carbon impact. And here it's very interesting in the EU, there is a different and potentially very powerful legislation under development, which is the Green Claims Directive. And that will require you to demonstrate with scientific methods and independent verification of any claims you make. So switch from plastic to paper or board or glass or metal, you need to be able to demonstrate that that's an improvement. Second big difference, there are no recycled content targets in SB 54. That is huge, and we'll maybe talk about it later. And finally, my last word on here, the acceptance of chemical recycling, you'll see, is, I just put unclear in both areas, because the acceptance of chemical recycling as being a responsible recycling method, a responsible market in SB 54, the approach to mass balance attribution, for those who are familiar with what that means, and the ability to claim recycled content, both from a regulatory point of view, but also on the package, is unclear in both regions. That will come in secondary legislation in Europe in 2028, but fundamentally hampering the industry willingness to move forward with chemical recycling investments, which is why you hear so much about we need chemical recycling to meet food grade, food contact standards, but nobody is investing in chemical recycling. So with that, Sebastian, quick whiz through it. Now I'm back to you.
Great. Thank you, Martin. And there's a lot to chew on here. I'm sure everyone is sort of drowning in even what you just presented. So we'll come back and get into a couple of follow-up questions. And then again, I encourage everyone, I think Beth has posted as well, to start posting any questions you may have in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to those later. So for now, I want to flip to Elena, and maybe you can walk us through some of the discussion on the CSRD. Oh, you're muted.
Okay.
There.
You can hear me now? It's okay?
Yes, all good, all good. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Very pleased to have this opportunity. Good afternoon or good morning for you. For me in Spain, it's good afternoon. So I am going to try to explain very quickly in 10 minutes, it's the time I have, which is the CSRD applied to American brands from the perspective of plastic packaging and all these kind of things. But first of all, I would like to here you have my agenda. Now we are going to talk about who we are, Peterson Solutions, my company, the company I work for. Then I will talk a little bit to the European regulation landscape, because it's very important to understand which are these goals that are inside this Green Deal. As CSRD is part of the Green Deal, and as you should know as well, this has been changed with the omnibus package. So this is another thing I am going to talk about, which are the main changes that are going to happen and will affect the companies that will be under the scope of CSRD. And at the end, what do the US brands and suppliers need to know? So first of all, I am going to start a little bit about my company. So Peterson Solutions is the consultancy division of the international privately owned company Peterson, and is dedicated to making a positive impact through sustainability. Our presence extends to more than 35 countries with more than 1,000 employees and over 40,000 clients worldwide, ranging from multinationals to local producers, as well as government and non-profit organizations. As a family-owned business, we are distinguished by our expert delivery, fostered by our boots-on-the-ground experts, and having top capability building skills. Peterson Solutions has been operating in the field of inspections, logistics, quality, certifications, and risk management for more than 100 years now. And our main areas of services include the sustainable sourcing, working in fields such as regenerative agriculture, sustainable supply chains and traceability, social impact and legislations and regulations such as the famous European Union Deforestation Regulation and the CSRD. We have as well the sustainability services, where we help our clients on their ESG strategies and reporting, carbon footprint and life cycle assessment, related legislations and regulations, and sustainable financing as well. We have the area of certification support, where we help our clients in the implementation of sustainability standards. And all of these services are strongly supported by our technology and academic departments, where in the technology area, we deliver solutions for our clients, including digital consultancy and project management, data analytics, geoservices, and software development. And our academic solutions include tailor-made solutions for our clients' capacity building, such as e-learning and blended learning solutions. So if we go to the CSRD, before starting with this, I would like, as said, to go a little into the context of the European Union economic landscape, as this regulation is part of the European Union Green Deal. The main objective of the Green Deal is to make the European Union the first climate neutral continent, and this implies the following high-level objectives: not net greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, economic growth decoupled from the use of the resources, and no person or place is left behind. To achieve this, the Green Deal includes as main drivers the promotion of a circular economy by encouraging sustainable product design and reducing waste, and mobilizing investments and financial resources to support these transitions, promoting cleaner, healthier, and more efficient modes of transportation, investing in research and development of zero carbon technologies, promoting sustainable industrial practices and innovation, transitioning to renewable energy sources and improving energy efficiency and reducing pollution to improve air, water, and soil quality, improving the energy efficiency of buildings, promoting sustainable agricultural practices and support farmers in their transition, and finally, to protect and restore biodiversity and ecosystems. To help implementing all these actions, several legislations have been developed, such as the ones you can see in the slide, and one of the legislations is as well the PPWR that Martin was talking about. But in my case, I am going to focus on CSRD, who is as well aligned with the European Taxonomy Regulation and the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, as they all form part of the European Union Sustainable Finance Framework. Sorry. Okay. So regarding CSRD. CSRD is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and is the European Commission directive that replaces the previous non-financial reporting directive as of January 1st, 2024. The CSRD is part of the European Union's broader sustainable finance and environmental policies, with the primary objective of enhancing the transparency and comparability of the sustainability-related information disclosed by companies. This directive requires companies to report on the impact of their activities related to environmental, social, and governance aspects, particularly based on the principle of the double materiality. Okay, so CSRD includes requirements for organizations to publicly disclose information about which are their impacts and challenges in relation to the environmental, social, and governance matters, that is the impact materiality, and as well how these impacts affect the organization's business itself, that we call the financial materiality. So the assessment from both perspectives are what we call the double materiality assessment, and this will help the companies to determine which are their material topics. Once these material topics have been determined, the companies then must report on them in accordance with the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, the famous CSRD, and they need to disclose information related to their material impacts, risks, and opportunities associated to the material topics. This is a new aspect that is appearing with the CSRD, that the companies have to disclose on impacts, risks, and opportunities. And this changes the way to do the stakeholders consultation for the companies. So here in this slide, you can see which are the main European sustainability reporting standards, where you can see that there are a set of reporting standards for the companies that are affected by CSRD. They were developed to enhance the quality and consistency of the sustainability reporting by companies, and designed to apply to companies of various types and sizes, including large corporations as well as small and medium enterprises. Each ESRS standard has to be used to determine the necessary data points, both qualitative and quantitative, necessary to disclose for each material topics. And as you can see, we have the cross-cutting standards that are the ones that are all the information that the company has to provide regarding their scope of activities, kind of organization we are talking about, etc. Then we have the topical standards, when you can find the environmental, the social, and the governance ones. Inside the environmental, we have climate change, that is very important and very associated to the Green Deal. But as well, as you can see, for example, we have the E5, that is the resource use and circular economy, that is very related to the plastic industry and all these regulations that we are talking about. And then we have as well the social standards, where the companies have to talk regarding social topics related to their own workforce, but as well the one on the workers in the value chain. And this is where the companies that are supplying to the European Union companies are going to be affected, because they will have to report some kind of information that the European Union-based companies will require to them. So if we go to next slide, I wanted to show you here that there is a change that has been occurred to the CSRD, and this change has been provoked by the Omnibus package. So in this case, the Omnibus package is a proposal to amend three key pillars of the European Green Deal: the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the CSRD that we are talking today, and as well the Taxonomy Regulation. In this slide, you can have a summary of all the changes that have been proposed by the Omnibus content, but I would highlight the ones regarding to the application scope. It has been reduced to apply to European Union-based companies with more than 1,000 employees, and before it was for companies even listed SMEs or companies with more than 250 employees. And for the non-European companies, the scope will be for the ones that we will have more than 450 million turnover inside the European Union and subsidiaries with more than 50 million turnover. Its application has been postponed for 2 years, and the ESRS are going to be reviewed to reduce by 70%, a very high number, the number of data points to report. I say this is a very high number because with the previous version of the ESRS, the companies could have maybe more than 1,000 data points to disclose. So with the reduction of the 70%, the number of data points is going to be reduced quite a lot. And one important thing is that the double materiality assessment is still required. This is an important thing as well because the double materiality assessment can be seen as well as a good opportunity and a good tool for the companies to determine which are the main topics that are going to affect them regarding the sustainability. And the idea is to introduce this impacts, risks, and opportunities in the business strategy as well. Okay, if I go to the next one, without experience working in CSRD and knowing which are the material topics that the companies in the plastic packaging sector have to report, I'm going to see which are the main topics that the US companies and brands and packaging suppliers will be mainly required to comply with. So if the company is falling into the CSRD scope, this company will need to perform the double materiality assessment to identify which are the material topics that they will need to cover in the sustainability report. And this is a thing that even we can see in the slide that for the US companies, they will not have this obligation until 2029. The data will be the ones for 2028. And as well, the double materiality assessment is an exercise that takes time if we want to use it as a strategy as well. And it would be good for the companies not to wait until last moment to start for this process. And as well, the sustainability report must be elaborated in accordance with the European Sustainability Reporting Standards and will have to include KPIs, targets, actions, and plans related to the ESG material topics that have been determined. So this is why my recommendation is not wait until last moment if the company is going to be affected by CSRD to start with this kind of actions and exercises. For the US packaging suppliers, maybe the small and medium enterprises that are not directly affected by CSRD, but their clients will be, or European Union-based companies that will be affected by CSRD, or US companies that will be affected by CSRD as well. These companies, for the experience we have, one of the important things that all the companies have as material are the ones related to climate change. So the carbon footprints will be especially scope 1 and 2 for the US suppliers. This will be one thing that their clients will ask to them because they will need this data for them to calculate the scope 3. Also, the CSRD affected companies will prefer always suppliers with low carbon footprints and who will offer, and as we see in the legislation, this is something that will be important as well to comply with the European Union legislation, that these companies offer recycled renewable products from non-virgin sources and that provide recyclable or reusable products. So these are things that the company should start to work on and to see if they haven't already started on, to see how they can improve this part. And of course, the CSRD affected companies will ask their suppliers about which are the environmental and social impacts that they will cause on their activities and their workers, and as well the financial risks and opportunities that this can provide to them. So with this part, I have finished my short presentation regarding this, and we can discuss later on with the questions and answers in the fireside as well.
Great. Thank you, Elena. Appreciate that. And yes, we will come back to some questions. So I see already that some folks are starting to post questions. Feel free to keep posting them. We're going to do a little bit of a fireside chat first, and then we'll start targeting some of the questions that you're posting. So let me start by going back to you, Martin, on the PPR. Sorry, on your discussion on PPWR. Yeah, sorry. You've highlighted the fact that companies need to take responsibility for post-consumer plastic. It's a focus on recyclability. Can you get a little bit deeper into, though, the implications on the required infrastructure, specifically all the way from collection through to the actual processing and recycling itself? How does this tie to the infrastructure needs in legislation?
Got it, Sebastian. So I think the question is around what's the responsibility of the brands and the value chain participants to get that infrastructure into place. So 3 points I would make, but they're all related to extended producer responsibility, EPR. So firstly, the way that I think most people think about EPR is as a funding mechanism. I've even heard people describe it as a tax in disguise. But EPR to support the funding of such infrastructure and the operation that comes afterwards. So firstly, the capital investment and the operation of the collection and sorting systems. Some EPR schemes go all the way through to recycling. The majority of them actually fund the collection, fund the sorting, and then the recycling has to be managed more within the free market. But I think equally important as a consequence of producer responsibility is the way that's being typically met. So it's being typically met by brands establishing what is known as a product recovery organization, a PRO, product recovery organization, to manage on their behalf that responsibility for waste usage. And I think what is really interesting about the PROs is it creates a new player in the value chain that actually is very well placed to see the holistic system, to see everything from household behavior, putting the garbage out on the street, all the way through the mechanisms used to collect that, the mechanisms used to sort it, and to deliver it to recyclers. And to understand also the incredibly complex and nuanced ways those systems work. It's not just about infrastructure. Things like waste management contracts can be really important. If contracts are placed by municipalities and only renewed every 5 years, your ability to make changes is really influenced by that. And you need to look at the economic drivers that are embedded into a waste management contract. So PRO is very well placed to understand that. And then lastly, and I think one of the points I always love to make is when people talk about EPR and they're immediately associating it with the funding. I've brought in think about the PRO as a consequence of EPR. But for me, the most powerful part is the clue is in the word, extended producer responsibility. So as an industry, we've spent 50, 60 years developing solutions that optimize experience, consumer experience, supply chain experience, cost and performance from manufacturing to the point of use. And whatever happens after then, we're not involved, not our responsibility. What EPR does is it closes that loop and it forces producers to think about what is happening after use, and it forces them to carry the costs and the implications of that. So that creates a huge incentive to start optimizing across the full life cycle. So not only to deliver to the consumer, but what happens afterwards and to come up with improved solutions. I think that's going to be incredibly impactful. Now, I said we've had 50 years to optimize where we are today. We've created tremendous complexity as a result of this. Design guidelines will slowly unpick, maybe not going backwards in time, maybe going forwards, but they will slowly unpick that. And I think we will see a lot of impact coming from this concept of extended producer responsibility. Hope that kind of answers it, Sebastian.
Yep. Very helpful. Thanks. I want to also touch on, you had the slide that compared PPWR to SB 54. And I live in California. I'm inundated with information about SB 54, the focus on source reduction being the primary axis of that legislation versus the recyclability. So when you're a US brand selling in the EU, what do you need to think about in looking at PCR content specifically versus the recycled content targets that are articulated?
I think you've answered your own question there, Sebastian. The PCR content target to me is probably the biggest or most impactful difference between the two legislations. So SB54 does not have recycled content targets, as you said, which actually means that basic recycling solutions are good enough. In order to achieve a recycling rate, then we can choose to recycle into lower quality applications, low-end applications like plastic lumber, like railway ties, like cement blocks, like paint pots, garden furniture, which is actually an industry which has been well developed in Europe. We call them the durable markets because the applications have a longer lifetime than packaging. But those markets are limited in scale. So they're easier to get to, they're less demanding in terms of quality, and perhaps only at the end of the day, 15% of put on market volumes can go into those applications. So that focus in SB54 will get things kick-started, but I think it will lead eventually to disappointment. The big difference in Europe, to answer your question, is the PCR content target. 35% going up to 65%. That drives closed loop solutions. That means that for every packaging, you've created a market here for a high quality recycler that you can include back in the original application, not in a railroad tie, but back in a high-end food packaging, for example, or food preservation film. So that drives this need for high quality recycling, and it drives for brands a huge focus on where am I going to get these high quality recyclers? What's it going to take to get them? And ultimately, that will also drive their own behaviors in terms of the design that I talked about before. It will change the infrastructure which is required. So Europe is going to have to invest in high quality mechanical recycling, chemical recycling also, although we touched on that before. High quality mechanical recycling needs much more granular sorting than people are doing today. That requires advanced sorting technologies. It probably requires secondary sorting infrastructure, quality management through the whole system, all the way from curbside collection through primary sorting, secondary sorting, recycling, unique quality management, all the way through. I think it's a fundamental difference between PPWR and SB54.
Yeah, and as you point out, Martin, I think the maturation of chemical recycling will be critical here, right? In the sense that the limitations of mechanical recycling will make that difficult over time. Great. I'm going to flip a little bit to ask a couple of questions to you, Elena. At this point, you quickly went through the issue of double material assessment, DMA. This is a really complex topic. And so if you can just quickly recap what that covers and ultimately what companies need to know to determine the impacts, the risks, the opportunities associated with their DMA, that would be really helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to use my presentation. Just one moment, please,
Sure.
because I think if it is visual, sometimes it's easier when we are talking about something. So, yeah. Tell me if you can see it, please.
There it is.
You can see?
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
So, yeah, it is very important. Yeah, this is something that the companies are asking to themselves, know how to determine the impacts, risks, and opportunities. This is something that is already written, or we have a methodology, and this methodology is included in the CSRD. So, as you can see in the screen, the first part of the process is to do the stakeholder engagement. And it is very important because with this information is how the companies are going to know about their impacts, risks, and opportunities. So the first thing that they need to do is to do their value chain mapping to help them to identify which are the processes and operations that are going to be included in this value chain, and as well the related stakeholders for each process, because these are the ones that need to be consulted. And then the stakeholder consultation has to be done on the actual and potential impacts, risks, and opportunities. The stakeholders will include the clients, it will include the employees, it will include not only the employees such as a group, but some important people working in the company, like financial people for the financial assessment, but as well operational people or operational managers and all these kind of people that will help to determine which are these potential and actual impacts, risks, and opportunities. And the consultation is not the traditional consultation that was normally used for the simple materiality, that the stakeholders were consulted on which is the importance you are giving to this topic or this other topic. That is something that sometimes it even depended on the way the consulted person had wake up to decide if this day, for example, if they knew something in the news that the water was lacking, for them the water was the more important thing to think of. So the way to consult the companies is first to determine internally which are these impact, risks, and opportunities that are more likely related to each of the topics that we were looking at in the ESRS. And with this information, they need to consult each stakeholder on the part that could more affect to them. And with this information is when then the companies can perform the double materiality assessment, because they will ask as well if they think these impacts, risks, and opportunities will happen in the near future or in the long-term horizon, and how they would evaluate the impact on them, and as well the financial part, that is the impact of all of these topics happening that will have on the company itself. So it is very important the methodology used to determine which stakeholders to consult, and the way to make the consultation is fundamental to obtain the necessary information on the importance of the identified risks and opportunities. That is the main objective of the consultation, and then this will serve as a basis to perform the following phases, such as the impact assessment and the financial assessment. And once this has been done, is when the company already has which are the material impacts and risks and opportunities where they can work on, so to build on a strategy, and as well, if they are affected by CSRD, they will have to report on.
Right.
I hope
and so just building on that a little bit, Elena, when we're talking about EU companies needing to do this assessment, what do they need to ask their US suppliers then in order to still be able to comply? Is there a list of questions or data that they need to get to here with their US suppliers, and US suppliers should be prepared for?
Yeah, for example, one thing that we can look at to know what the companies can ask to their suppliers is to the ESRS. So inside the ESRS, we have all the topics that are related to, for example, climate change. And here you can see that the companies are going to ask about actions and plans to prevent climate change, but as well the ones that how to deal with the climate change, because we know that there is climate changing, and the companies need to have action plans to fight against this and to prevent what is happening. I don't know if you know, but in Valencia, my city, there was a very big climate Dana. I don't know if we call that in English. It's something that happened that it was raining a lot during one night, and we had a flu, and 250 people died, and a lot of roads were broken, and now we are still recovering from that. So for the companies, it is very important to have this in mind, that this can happen, and to take actions to prevent this if this happens, for example, no? And regarding the plastic sector, of course, we have the E5 standard that is talking about the resource use and the circular economy. So the companies can find there which are the main points that the companies will need to disclose regarding this topic, and which are the main things that they will be asked by the clients. But of course, regarding the recyclability of their materials, the materials that they use for this, and other things. For example, I have here I made a little summary about what the companies can ask to their suppliers. No? For example, they will ask about the product composition, the material selection, if they are using recycled or reused materials, to explore other alternatives such as biodegradability or compostable, and how to reduce the packaging waste with eco-friendly solutions. So these are things that, of course, these companies are going to be asked by their clients, as well as things related to life cycle assessment, reutilization, and recyclability, for example. And this is for the environmental part. If we are talking about the social part, the companies are going to be asked as well as the own workforce. The ESRS have two topics more. One is the own workforce, that is for the workers that are working inside the companies, but they have as well the workers in the supply chain. So in the case of the workers in the supply chain, they will be asked how these companies are dealing with workplace diversity and inclusion, fair wages and living wages, health and safety incidents and accidents, or on this kind of metrics.
Great. So I have a bunch more questions for both of you, but I want to get to a few questions from the folks on the line here to start addressing those, because there's some good ones on the chat. So let me just start with the first on this list that I'm seeing here. The question is, when an EU-based company imports product from the US, unpacks it, and either repacks or uses it, who's considered the responsible party based on PPWR? Is it the European or the American one? Martin, this is probably for you.
Yeah, very, very easy if you want to sell into Europe. The selling entity is the one that is responsible. So it's not going to be the American company. If they're repackaging and selling through a European subsidiary, it'll be the European subsidiary. But of course, the European subsidiary cannot sell if it doesn't comply. So they will have to go back to the US supplier.
Okay, maybe a couple of other quick ones here that I see on the chat as well. One is, does the regulation apply to e-commerce cross-border market?
Within Europe, absolutely, yes. Yep. So I'm not sure what cross-border.
Yeah, so the implication would be if you're buying a product over e-commerce from the US or somewhere else, then that company is still going to be responsible for the product that gets shipped into Europe, I assume.
Correct. If it's delivered in Europe, absolutely.
Yep. Okay. And then the other one here was, does the law exempt certain product types, for example, pharmaceuticals?
Yes. Yeah, pharmaceuticals are exempted, even secondary packaging, so not just primary packaging, but also secondary packaging has a degree of exemption. And I talked about the difference in the recycling targets for contact-sensitive materials. So it's recognized that getting food approval for recycled materials is extremely challenging under European food safety law. It's a little bit tougher than under FDA. So the result of that is that you saw that the targets for PCR content, recycled content, are lower for food contact and other contact-sensitive applications and being regulated.
Great. Great. Well, let me throw out a couple more questions in the time we have remaining, and I want to also give both of you a chance to kind of have a couple closing comments on how to think about things if you're in company shoes. But just first, Martin, if you could, on eco-modulation, you talked about eco-modulated EPR as a tool to drive adoption. Can you share a bit more on this around design guidelines, et cetera?
Yeah, so the concept of eco-modulation, for those who are not familiar, is that the fee that you pay to put a package or an article on the market, so the EPR fee, is differentiated according to the type of material, addressing the complexity of the end solution. So if you put on, for example, a very lightweight, multi-barrier complex film structure, you will pay a much higher fee than you would do for a simple PET beverage bottle, for example. The PET beverage bottle, very easily recycled. The multi-layer, multi-material film, very difficult to recycle. What it does is that it provides a tool to which over time will drive adoption of design guidelines as well. So the further you deviate from design guidelines, the probability is the higher the eco-modulation fee. And just to give people a sense of dimension of this, probably the most advanced country in Europe in terms of applying eco-modulation today is Belgium. And in Belgium, you will pay 2,000 euros per ton, if I'm right, for an EPR fee, so more than close to $2,500 per ton for a multi-layer complex film structure. where for other materials you may be paying $100 a ton, $150 a ton. So can create a tremendous incentive to encourage people to adopt more recycle-friendly solutions.
Got it. Great. Elena, let me just ask you a question regarding different size companies. So some of the folks here are either from large companies or smaller companies. Is there some unique considerations for smaller companies to start taking steps now ahead of the curve? You mentioned trying to get ahead of the process here earlier in the planning and assessment.
In the case of smaller companies, you're asking. Sorry.
Yes, in the case of smaller companies in
Yeah.
particular.
Yeah, in the case of smaller companies, for example, I can tell you the clients we already had before the change of the omnibus law, that they were initially affected by CSRD because they were less than 200 employees, but with a lot of the turnover and the balance sheet were high, so they were affected by CSRD. And they started with a double materiality assessment, and then Omnibus appeared, and they knew that they were not affected by CSRD anymore. But they decided to continue with the double materiality assessment for them because they understood that this was an exercise very important for them to understand which are the main topics that could affect them regarding sustainability. So these companies are still working on that, even if they are not affected anymore by CSRD. And the only thing that they will do is that they will not have to report against CSRD. So they will report against voluntary standards, or we have another standards that I don't know if it has arrived to the USA companies, but these are the VSMEs, that are standards that are based on CSRD, but are more easier to implement, and you don't need to do a materiality analysis. You just need to report against these standards. So these could be standards that could be used by these kind of companies, for example.
Great. I know we're at time or almost at time, but I want to get to just sort of some closing questions with both of you. And Martin, for you, we know that the EU is negotiating the Green Claims Directive. Maybe you can speak a little bit to where this is headed and really how businesses, even now ahead of that, could start to plan for it. And when we start thinking about audits that will be needing to be undertaken, et cetera, on upstream and downstream impacts, can you give a little bit of a perspective there ahead of that curve?
Yeah, I think the Green Claims Directive is, I mean, it's been negotiated, so it's not law, and it's not clear exactly what it will look like. But I think it's potentially a very important, another very leveraging type of regulation, which is going to underpin also a lot of the actions under the PPWR. So the Green Claims Directive is requiring that companies, in order to make sustainability claims, that they have to be able to have those independently validated. So scientifically validated, independently validated. Today, I feel like a lot of decisions are made to change to so-called more sustainable packaging, paper solutions, board solutions, for example, even going back to glass, without necessarily the scientific evidence to say this is the right thing to do. It's complex. So there are not going to be easy solutions, but I think the transparency this will bring and the requirement that a brand can explain their decisions. So we switched to paper and cardboard for this reason, and there is scientific evidence to say ultimately that is a better solution.
Great. And then Elena, just on your side, as we think about CSRD, if you're a US company, and a US brand or supplier selling into the EU, do you have just like a short list of tips and tricks or advice that you would give to those companies selling into the EU under CSRD?
What I would do is to first do a gap analysis regarding CSRD or even VSMEs, and to see which are the key data points that for example, these reporting standards are asking to the companies, and I would look what are missing and what I need to do. So yeah, I will start with this gap analysis, and with this done, I would start building a roadmap to to have all this information that is included in these standards, to be ready to have this information for my clients.
Great, great. Well, I know we're a little over time. I don't know if either of you wanted to say anything else or throw anything else out there before we close. I'll leave it to you to chime in if you do.
Yeah, I mean, you asked before, Sebastian, about closing comments. You know, what would be the one key takeaway for me? I could write a book on that probably, but I think where I would go there is just to emphasize to everybody, 2030 is just around the corner, and that's where the PPWR really has impact. I don't think it's going to get kicked down the road. It may do. But I was on another webinar just immediately prior to that, and one of the other speakers said very clearly they don't believe that there will be a significant reduction in the ambitions of the PPWR. It's just too embedded in the way the European Commission is thinking. So it's there. It has some really challenging targets, and you can wait until 2029 and it will become a complete crisis. So better start planning for it now. Adopting design guidelines, looking at making sure that you have solutions which enable you to recycle your products, making sure that you have access to recycled content, and start to get that material tied up. Today, we're seeing recyclers going out of business because there isn't enough value in the value chain. And actually completely the opposite direction to what we need, which is heavy investment in infrastructure. And if that doesn't happen, then companies are going to find smarter companies will be in good shape, and the companies that have neglected it, I think, are going to find it very, very difficult come 2030.
I think it's tremendously, hope is not a strategy. And
Yeah, exactly.
and the issue that you're highlighting around the viability of recycling business models is tremendously important, right? The ability to have sustained, not just capital inflows to build the infrastructure, but operating expense inflows to sustain the collection and the pre-processing and everything that needs to happen throughout. Elena, anything else from your perspective that you wanted to highlight before we sign off?
Just to say that it is very important to know which are the legislation and the regulation that are coming, and to be prepared, as Martin said, to comply with them. But not only because this is a regulation, because we need to improve on that. And as you both said, this is something that is happening, and that the clients are starting and the consumers are starting to look at these new materials or these kind of products that are more friendly to the environment. So I think it's something that is inside the global happening, and the companies need to be aware of that.
Great. Well, I appreciate both of you taking the time to speak with us today and to field the questions, and I'm sure this has been very informative to everyone. There was a question earlier, will we share the materials? Yes, we will share the materials. We'll also have a recording available. We really appreciate everyone's attendance because we know this is happening across time zones. Hopefully you found this quite useful. And we're even happy to field additional questions. If you want to follow up with us offline, we'll do our best to answer those questions along the way. So thank you again. Thank you both, Martin, Elena, and we look forward to speaking to you in the future. Take care.
Thank you, Sebastian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.